Hi, I'm Suzanne Turner, and welcome to a podcast delving into the personal narratives within the clinical research industry. Through candid interviews, we'll learn about the personal journeys and motivations of individuals who have chosen this profession, what I like to call their why. This podcast is not just for industry insiders. It's for everyone curious about the human side of healthcare. Beyond the industry's negative reputation, we'll shed light on the dedicated professionals behind clinical trials. Join us as we uncover the heart and passion of those working tirelessly behind the scenes in clinical research. Welcome to Heart of the Trial. Hello, lovely listeners. I'm your host, Suzanne Turner, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to Heart of the Trial, where we uncover the human stories within clinical research and shed a positive light on the pharmaceutical industry. Our guest today is Christine Kanalis, who has over 25 years of experience in data management. So welcome to Heart of the Trial, Christine.
Oh, thanks, Suzanne. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. It's so much fun.
Oh my gosh, I already know this is going to be fun because you are hilarious. So it's going to be a good one for our listeners. So let's start off by, why don't you tell us what your role is and how that connects to the clinical trial process?
Sure, you bet. So if you're familiar with clinical trials, I'm the person that collects all of the data from the sites and gathers it all into one place, make sure that it's consistent across a patient, and make sure that the data that we've collected from the sites is actually the experience of each of the patients. And then my group will kind of get the data together in little packages so that the statisticians can then pick it up, do their analysis, and complete their clinical study reports. So that's my in the know explanation. Yeah. But when I'm talking to people on the streets, generally what I tell them is, you know, that guy at the end of the pharmaceutical commercials that talks about how your eyes are going to bleed and you might have a stroke if you take this. Like I'm the person that kind of figures that out based on information that we collect from people that we talked into giving this medicine to. So
that is fantastic. A fantastic explanation. So, all right. So how did you get into this? Because you've been doing it a long time. You've worked your way up to like director levels, right? You're usually director over departments. Like, how did you get into it? What was your path making it to this point? Tell us about that.
I don't like to brag, but I think that I have one of the best origin stories in the entire industry.
Okay, let's do it.
So when I was just a little baby mathematician in college, I wanted to get into statistics, and I wanted to work in a steel mill. I wanted to go back. I grew up in Pittsburgh, so my dad worked in the steel mill. All of my male relatives had something to do with the steel industry. Either they were coal miners or they did something. I had an aunt who was an executive secretary for U.S. Steel.
Wow.
Like she was the valedictorian of her class, but the only job she could get at the most important industry at that time was to take notes for somebody else. And my idea was I wanted to get a job in the mill and walk around with a hard hat and boss everybody around. So I wanted to get really into like process improvement, like Six Sigma, Deming, like the whole industrial statistics piece of it. So finished up undergrad, went to graduate school, was, nicely on pace to graduate and kind of wrap things up. I ended up getting an internship that was unpaid until you graduated. And then once you graduated, they would pay you as an intern. So in order to finish up my degree, I'm like, I will take whatever these last 2 credits, like whatever class you guys have. I just want to be done this semester. So I ended up taking a biostats class, and that took me, it took me off campus to the hospital. So now I have to take a bus because I don't have a car. So now I'm taking a bus to a hospital, and I find out that this isn't actually a class. This is a way for the hospital to get consultants to work with their residents and fellows on their research projects.
So what do you mean? So they pretended it was a class just so that they could have you guys come do free work for them, pretty much? Okay.
Right. Yeah, it was a class. You got credit. But in reality, you were in the hospital working with these residents and fellows and kind of advising them on the statistical components of their research work.
Interesting.
So I designed experiments for one doctor, an OBGYN who was lovely. And, as he's explaining things to me, I'm like, listen, I don't care. What I want is to finish up this. And I'm like, what you need to tell me is this good or is this bad? And then we'll make a nice presentation. You can talk about, whatever you did here and then I'll be finished and you'll be finished and we'll both look like rock stars. So finish up with him. His presentation was great. Ended up being a really nice sort of capstone to his work. And, I'm heading out of the hospital to catch the bus back to campus. Because if there's one thing I wanted to do in Arizona in 90-degree heat in the summertime is catch a bus. So this doctor, he's like, do you want to come over to the NICU and see the babies? I was like, what babies? He was like, oh, this experiment, like this research project was on these babies. Do you want to come see them? And I was like, yeah, sure. I'll come see the babies. I have 20 minutes before I have to catch the bus. So I end up walking into the NICU, and the little babies are there and they're all in their little plastic boxes. And their moms and dads are holding their hands through their little baby hands through the little glass thing. And I was like, now tell me again what we did. He was like, yeah, the babies here, if the results of our experiment were right, the intervention that we gave to the moms means that the babies will spend less time in those boxes. And I was like,
wow,
that is amazing. And it's kind of like cliche, but like your whole life changes based on like that kind of interaction.
I literally got goosebumps. Very, I just got goosebumps.
So yeah, I mean, I called my parents. I'm like, hey, I need another semester of school. I have to take a bunch of biology classes. I have to figure out kind of where I can get a job because I'm going to turn down that internship because it's industrial statistics and not what I want to do. Ended up, I talked to the professor of that class where they had conned me into working. And that was my job for the next 6 years. So,
wow. So you ended up working at that hospital? Wow.
Yeah. I still had to take the bus because I still didn't have a car. So
I love it. Oh my gosh. Okay. So I agree with you. That's a pretty cool origin story. So how did you go from working at this site, assisting with the statistics, to getting into, because you and I worked together, we were working together at a sponsor. So you somehow made the jump from site into sponsor world.
Right. I will credit everything to timing. So as we're working with these doctors, these residents and fellows, the hospital that I was working at got bought by a bigger hospital system. So now we have residents and fellows in Phoenix, and we have residents and fellows in Tucson, and we have residents and fellows in Colorado. And what we were trying to do was sort of leverage the data. So data that we collected in Phoenix could be combined with data we collected in Colorado if we could figure out how to transmit it and how to get it across these new internets that were springing up all over the place.
So, oh my gosh, Christine.
Right. Right. I was like, wait, if we can network. So I'm talking to the IT nerds and I'm talking to like uh, sites that had already been, actively participating in clinical research. So they're working in EDC systems where I'm just working in, databases that I'd spun up in SAS or Jump or whatever. Tools I had.
For our listeners, an EDC is an electronic data capture system, correct? So it's pretty much an electronic version of a paper data set. So instead of you having to write it out all on there, it's electronic. And then you said a couple other acronyms. You said SAS.
Right. SAS I don't even know what SAS stands for. Statistical Application Software, maybe?
That
Don't
makes
quote me on
sense,
it.
though, I feel like. So having an EDC was a lot better than having just a SAS system, it sounds like.
Right. Because what we were doing is talking with the doctors, and they were essentially writing down information like baby's weight, baby's APGAR scores. So how healthy they were when they were born. And we were collecting all of that and just typing it into individual, files and trying to combine that across these systems where companies like Medidata, data labs back in the day, they were already working on ways to transmit that data over the internet. And once I kind of figured out that you could do it like that, then it was more of a love affair with how do we get the data the way that we need it. So for me, it turned from consulting on designing experiments and using my stats background more to using the technology pieces and understanding the electronic data capture and how we could leverage that at sort of the system level.
Pull it all together and actually start giving you the numbers that you need without you having to go to those individual files.
Right.
Yeah. And the systems now are they advanced enough that they do a lot of the work for you with that?
Yeah. I mean, if you're looking at a modern EDC system, so if you're sitting at a research site, so if you're participating in a clinical trial and you go in and they're taking your blood pressure and they're asking you about your condition and they're measuring tumor size, whatever the outcomes they're looking for, they're collecting all of that in your medical record, but the sites are also putting that into an electronic data capture system that's storing all of that in the cloud. So there's not even like a server that they have it on and then they transmit it. It's just all up in the cloud. So the work that we were doing, 25 years ago that took us, we would type it in our individual workstations, and then I would mail with the United States Post Office. I would mail a floppy disk to Colorado. They would
not
get
even
that.
A CD, a floppy disk. Wow.
Floppy.
Okay. We've come a long way.
Right.
Yes.
No. Right. If you think about it now, you're like, why wouldn't you just put it where it goes? Right. It's amazing to me.
It's crazy because
it's amazing to me.
Like 25 years does not actually seem that long ago. And to realize that how quickly things have changed, that is crazy, because then it went to CD and then it went to USB drives, I assume, USB drives. And then before you got to this electronic, that's crazy. Wow.
Right. I mean, it is just nuts. Yeah. Nuts. And the way that, when I first started, so I worked at the hospital system for, I think, 3 years, and then wanted to switch location. So I was in Arizona and I wanted to move back home. I was getting married and I needed the free babysitting. So I wanted to move closer to my parents. So I'm looking for a job, and the only place that really has a whole lot of research going on in Pittsburgh was the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. So then I worked at the site, actually doing, site qualification and site management. And through working with UPMC, there was a group of researchers who were doing more electronic data capture. They were doing an ePro. And I was like, what's an ePro? That sounds out there. So for people that don't know, ePro stands for electronic patient reported outcomes. So instead of the site taking your blood pressure or the site asking you how you feel and then writing it down, the ePro back in the day would be a Palm Pilot that you would carry around with you, and you would enter, like it would beep at you at specific times of the day, and it would ask you like 5 questions. Yes, I'm having a migraine. No, I had a migraine yesterday. No, I didn't eat turtles. Whatever. And we would collect the data on a Palm Pilot and then use a modem. So if you remember hooking your computer up to a modem through a fax line.
Oh God.
Like we would send data over a fax line.
I'm so glad our technology is advanced. Let me just say, faxing was the worst.
It's crazy.
The worst. I hated it.
Right. So from there, I got involved with that company, and I think there were probably 30 people at that company when I started there, and you just did anything. So a site needed help, you'd hop on the phone with the site, to the point where I was running across the street from our offices to buy a new modem from Radio Shack. I'm like, do you guys have a 28K modem I can buy?
Yeah. Are there Radio Shacks anymore?
Yeah. I think that there's like 2. I'm pretty sure.
Oh.
Right. Yeah. And from there, it was just a series of data management. I spent a decade working in data management at a CRO, at a clinical research organization.
I figured you probably hit a CRO at some point. Yeah. Yeah. I know, like we all usually make our way through there at some point. So yeah.
Yeah. And then it was just a CRO. I had a non-compete, so I couldn't go to another CRO. So I went to a vendor, and then had a non-compete, couldn't go to another vendor. So went back to the CRO and kind of bounced back and forth between doing like traditional data management, where you're interacting with the clinical data all the time, to working with new technology and kind of understanding how these things were going to evolve, like looking at the use of patient's own equipment for ePro, and looking at, new and sort of novel approaches to doing that electronic data capture. So once one guy gets the idea, he can kind of keep it for a little bit, and then people get irritated. And then there's a new guy who comes along, and then you're like, oh, that's the guy. And then people hate him. There's always like a new guy who comes along and is doing it better, less annoying.
Oh, that's so funny. So what is the difference between, because you've mentioned the statistics a lot, what is the difference between what you do with the data management and what the statisticians do?
Yeah, the stats guys are going to be really focused on the analysis of the data. So they're going to be looking at sort of the design of the research. The stats people are going to be focused on, did it work? So they're going to look at, let's just use a quick example. If it's a cancer drug, they're going to have very specific predetermined outcomes that they wanted to have an impact on early on in the study. So when they're writing the protocol says we're expecting tumor size to decrease, and we're expecting as another outcome, disease-free progression, or progression-free. They're expecting some good things to happen, and there are specific ways that you measure each of those. So the statisticians are really focused on using statistical methods to show beyond the chances that the drug was effective. So yeah, it shrunk tumors more in this group versus this group. And that's what we wanted to prove. And the only way that the FDA is going to buy that is if you use very specific statistical tests, like tried and true. When people start talking about p-values, that's what they're talking about. That the differences between these two groups didn't happen just by chance, or effects of something else like the environment. The statisticians are worried about kind of controlling for all of that and making sure that when they do take this drug to market and they say it works, that it actually works. And my job is sort of like the prep work for that.
Okay. Creating the systems
in order
to collect that data.
Right. In order to be able to do that analysis, they need to have these nice, clean, complete, accurate data sets. So they're looking at feeding those data sets into their statistical software packages. And I'm looking at getting the data in, making sure that it's accurate, making sure that it's complete, making sure that everything that the statistician is going to need is there and where they expect it and how they're expecting it. So the FDA has come up with some very specific criteria for how we pass data between these two groups. So there's a SDTM. So there's a I have no idea.
SD like David or T like Tom?
SDTM.
SDTM. I'm gonna
statistical data and tabulation model. Yeah, Google knows. I don't know.
Study data tabulation model. Okay.
Right. Study data, not statistical. Yeah. So the FDA tells you what these data sets are supposed to look like. There's, I think, 26 individual data sets that cover everything from the demographics of the patient to how you treated the drug, to how long the patients were exposed, to what happened to the patients at the end of the study. So the FDA tells you what your data has to look like. And that's kind of what the statisticians are expecting. So my group will make sure that the data comes in like it should. And that's essentially interacting with however many sites are involved in the trial. So if you're a patient who's enrolled, you're going into your PCP and saying, hey, I think I'd like to participate in this. And the site's collecting your height, your weight, your outcomes. And they're individually putting each patient into that EDC. And my team is making sure that all the bits and pieces of that patient's data get put into the right place in those very specific FDA mandated data sets, so that then the statistician knows what they have to do with it. So essentially, data management's the connection between the site and the stats team. We're the people that go out and get what this guy needs. Of course, with the help of
right, and
they do some
just a few little things, but so you obviously then have to work very close with the statisticians on the study to ensure that when you're designing the EDC, that it's set up to collect the correct information that they need in order to give them those outputs. So,
right, and we're kind of bound by what's in the protocol. So the protocol will say, hey, we want to look at tumor size. We want to look at disease-free progression. We want to look at, time between episodes of migraine. And these are our outcomes. And we're essentially bound by that protocol to collect that data and only that data. So it's a combination of going to the stats team being like, what do you need to measure tumor size? Like, do you need width? Do you need volume? Like how do you measure tumor size, and getting down into those details, and yet being sort of bound by what we've already put in the protocol. So, I think as we were sitting together on the sponsor side and we're hearing arguments about, we can't collect that. I can't put that in the database because it's not in the protocol. I know you would be massively interested to hear, what happened with each patient with that thing, but I can't put it in the database and we can't look at it unless it's in the protocol.
And, I actually think this is the first time on this podcast, the protocol has come up. And I want you, in your words, how would you sum up for the everyday person who's not familiar with clinical trials? How would you sum up what a protocol is?
Right. It's the prescription for how we're going to make sure this drug works. So we think at the drug company that we've got this miracle cure for a tennis elbow. And what we want to do is run these experiments on a bunch of people. And what we have to do in order to be able to do that is convince the FDA that it's okay for us to experiment on our fellow citizens. There's a whole history of us maybe not being the best citizens when it comes to experimentation on other humans.
I want to do a whole episode on, by the way, because it's very interesting how we got to where we did. But yeah, I like to say that I feel like the protocol is kind of, when you read like an SOP and it's like, what is the purpose of this SOP? That's kind of what the protocol is. What is the purpose of this trial? Right. And as you were just saying, like whatever's in that protocol, like that's what the FDA is going to hold the sponsor to. So if they say they're going to do something, they have to do it. If they say they're not going to do something, they cannot do it. So it's very important.
Right. It's the whole guide. Like it's the how to. It's really
the first thing they create
the
on a study. Yeah.
Right. Like when I think I have this miracle cure for tennis elbow, as a research scientist, I'm already thinking about writing the protocol. I'm already thinking about writing, how do I prove it? Mm-hmm. What's my outcome? Like, is it how far I can bend, how far I can throw? How do I start thinking about that? And a lot of what happens at the sponsor companies, I think that a lot of people don't appreciate, is that you get 10, 20 really smart people in a room and you start talking about what's the most efficient way that we can mm-hmm. make sure that our theory is accurate, that we can make sure that this really works. And it's a fascinating process. Like being able to be in this industry and watch mm-hmm. that happen has been, one of the favorite parts of my job is watching people decide what's the most important thing.
I can't even imagine. From TMF standpoint, I've never been in those discussions because, we're the afterthought, the TMF, which is okay. Right. You get to be part of the, how are we going to do this? And then at the end, it's like, okay, well, now how are we going to document that, where I step in? So I can only imagine how amazing some of those conversations are. So, okay, so you've been doing this. You've had a very interesting journey on getting to where you are. But what's your, what I like to call your why? Like, why have you continued to do this? Because you've been in it a while. So, what keeps you motivated?
Yeah. I mean, I think it kind of goes back to that origin mm-hmm. story. Like, not every day doing this work mm-hmm. is fun. Not every day doing this work is rewarding. There are some times where you're part of that 10 or 20 people in that room fighting about what you think is the most important and having really hard discussions. Like we want everything to work because we want these medicines to get from pharmaceutical company boardroom planning to patients. I think there are a lot of people in this industry who really got into it because of the benefits to humans, the benefits to fellow man. And it is kind of cliche, and it's hard to keep that in mind when you're fighting over whether or not you're going to be able to put this case report form in the database, or whether or not you have to leave out one variable on a page. And then you're fighting with an investigator, the doctor mm-hmm. at the site, because you need him to sign something. And he's like, that's so unimportant to me. I'm seeing patients. And you're like, but we need to lock this down today because we're on a schedule, and he doesn't care at all. Like there are days like that. But when it fundamentally comes down to it, this is the work that I wanted to do. I wanted to be a part of an industry where I'm not making socks. And, thanks to the people who are making my socks, I appreciate them. Yep. They keep my feet warm. Love you guys. But I'm not in an industry where I'm, worried about the banking or like originally, I'm not worried about how thick the steel is. I'm not worried about whether or not the 1220 plant went down. I'm worried about whether or not the medicines that pharmaceutical companies are producing mm-hmm. work, and whether or not they should be in the hands of patients. And that's, for me, that's priceless. That's way more important than a lot of things. I mean, Suzanne, everybody works and everybody gives up a lot to be in their career. But, when you're traveling to here and to there and knowing that the stuff that's motivating that is getting good drugs to people it
helps.
It makes it a little bit easier.
And I think that a lot of us, we do a good job of, I've seen this both at the CRO and working with sponsors, having that little check-in every 3 to 6 months on some meeting where someone just kind of gives you that reminder, like, this is why we're doing this, because the day-to-day grind gets to you just like any job. But that or something happens, with something really successful on the study, and the energy that comes to everyone from that, because they do start to get that, oh my gosh, it's worth it reminder. So are you able to share with us, obviously keeping within whatever confidentiality you may have to, like maybe some of the studies you've worked on, especially if it was like something successful?
There, like every once in a while I'll be watching TV and a drug company commercial will come on for a company that I worked at, and I'll be like, that's me.
Yeah,
I did that.
I know.
That's
it's
me.
So cool.
Like, we worked at Decibel together. So Decibel got bought by Regeneron, and Regeneron's had some really nice success with the compound that we worked on. And that is, and probably will be the highlight of my career. Like, wow. It was funny because I was looking up some information on my phone earlier, and, I've got 1,000 internet tabs open. And so I was just going through and closing them. And then the article came up. There was an article in The Guardian, maybe July, about the first patient that entered this trial, and how she went from not being able to hear at all to having something that was normal hearing.
Really?
And
I hadn't heard. You need to send me the article. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And
I mean, early indicators and all of that, but
that is literally
to have some
life-changing.
Involvement.
Literally life-changing.
Right.
It's
a miracle, like as close as I'm going to get to be able to participate.
That makes me want to cry, actually.
Like,
holy
the fact
cow.
that this,
like, I remember.
Oh yeah, I shed a tear.
Because of what I do, I feel like it's so much outside of the rest of the study. I feel like I don't always fully understand everything that is going on in the actual study. What I understand is Christine has documents documenting what's happening in the study, and I need her to put those in the team up. That's what I understand. But one of the things when we were working together, that the company did that I absolutely loved is, for one of the studies, there was a video. I'm sure you remember watching. It was like 13 to 15 minutes long, talking about the procedure and walking through pretty much what the study was. And by the time I was done watching that like 15-minute video, I had such an understanding of what the purpose of the study was. Right. And it did blow my mind. And it like if every study I ever worked on, it showed that. And so then like now hearing that first patient is having such amazing success, that is mind blowing. It's crazy.
It's a bit of a slog. I mean, you don't get results like that all the time. And I will say, working in the industry for like 25, almost 30 years now, I've seen successful studies, but I've also seen a bunch of them that just didn't pan out. Like where the company has invested millions of dollars because they think this is going to be a great drug, only to find out like at the last, like they'd gone through phase 1, phase 2, like all the phases that you have to go through to get to an approval, got into phase 3. And then the phase 3 study just either wasn't designed right, or the intervention wasn't efficacious. It just didn't work. Like, it's heartbreaking. And to be involved in one that actually worked is awesome. Yeah, I'll continue to look back on it.
Yeah, not just work, but work to the level that it has. That is amazing. I cannot wait for you to send me this article and for me to read on it, because, oh my God, that is mind blowing. What, has there been anything else over the years that you've worked on that, like, do you have any like crazy stories?
Suzanne, that is such a loaded question. So I will tell you, like, behind the scenes stuff that happens, right? Like you're just trying, again, to illustrate, like, every day you're just trying to take a step forward, and it's a heavily regulated industry. Everything has to be just right. Everyone's sphincters are very, very tight about everything, because they have to.
For good reason. It's for good reason. Yes.
So, right. Like, you got to be a little uptight, because you don't want to be the reason that, like, let's say somebody screws something up on that decibel regeneration study, and that intervention that clearly works doesn't get to market because you can't document your stuff right. Like,
I feel sometimes keeps me up. I believe you. I think a lot keeps you up, but for just knowing you, I could see that. But for me, like, I feel like a witch so many times when I'm having to push back on things, and people see it as such minor things, and I'm like, I just don't want this little minor thing to be the reason to cause that downfall in the end, because little minor things add up. And that's the key. If it's just a one-off, but if it's a trend, if it's, so yes.
Right. Like, you don't know what the FDA is going to see. Yeah. So anyway, everyone's real tight, real uptight about things that are happening. So it was my first trip to Europe. So we're talking probably like 27 at this point, 28, still single and not married. Not that has any bearing, but I was pretty free and loose, like, whatever. Like, I'll go to Europe. Hey, do you need someone in London? I'll go to London. Yeah. What do I care? Fine. I'll get on the plane. So I'm in charge of the ePros. So at this point, those are little, Palm Pilots, little PDAs. Those of us born in the 70s will remember them. We carried them all through the 90s and love them. So I have this equipment. And I have 7. I have 7 and 7 chargers and 7 modems. So this is an entire backpack of electronics that I'm carrying through security. Fine. That goes okay. And I'm also having the company that we work with ship me another 250. This is a big meeting.
Wow.
Like, at this point, it was In Vivo Data's maybe first really big study. So I need 250 of these, because every site is sending 2 people to this investigator meeting, all of the CRAs, all of the sponsor people, and we're doing this presentation twice. So what I have is 2 sets, right? And everything arrives. I open the box, look, everything's here. Great. Then I go out to dinner with the client, like you do. And, there's cocktails because, again, it's the late 90s, early 2000s. There's cocktails and great. Then I get back to my hotel room in London, where I've never been before, and realize that none of these are charged. None of these devices has any battery life. So what that meant at that time was all of the software that we had downloaded onto these is gone. Like, once the battery dies, the software goes. So
no.
Right. So essentially what I have here are 250 paperweights. And it's me and the project manager. And we're not from London. We don't have
chargers.
The plug thing. We have 2. Like, I have one and he has one. And we have that, like, so I am calculating how long each of these things has to sit on the charger in an Excel spreadsheet to figure out how we can get them charged up enough so I can put software on them, so we can maybe pass them out and they can work for half of the presentation I have planned for the next day. Like, it was a nightmare. I'm calling the front desk. Like, and this is kind of the stuff that happens behind the scenes. Like, and we are minor players in this clinical trial. We are the people who are collecting 1/10 of the data. Like, everybody else has there's so much else that goes on, but the sort of individual acts of heroism that have to happen to make one of these trials successful is amazing to me. So Jason was the project manager's name. Jason and I are running around this hotel, like knocking on doors of people that we have met at dinner and asking them if they have a pluggy thing. Do you have a pluggy thing?
Yeah.
Luckily, the one guy had an entire power strip, so we were able to.
Wow. So does that mean that, like, because these ePros, you were giving them, were the investigators going to leave with these ePros? No, we
were gonna collect those. It was just for training.
They had 250 devices just for training. So, and these were going to be given to the patients then later in the trial. And so if the patients left, like if once these were given to the patients, would the same thing happen if they let them die? The software would die? Would it lose all the data they'd collected to that point?
We were smart enough to, at this point, we could isolate a piece of the memory and keep the data, but we couldn't keep the programs that would run the data collection piece of the software. Like we could segregate a piece of the memory. So that's what would happen. They'd let them die.
I was going to say, did you like make it like
your cell phone
big bold letters read at the top of every page? Don't let it die.
Just put it back on your charger when you're done. Just
pain, though.
Oh, and these are the problems that you had in those early days. Like, I'm like, okay, well, your device died. Now you don't get to collect a week's worth of information because you have to mail it back.
Oh, I got to mail you a new one. Oh, because then they had to mail them. So, now when you do, because like you were talked about the ePro stuff, which I've seen ePro stuff. I didn't realize like what it stood for and exactly what it was. But like now, is that come in like app form? Like it's an app they can download on their phone, right? Or a website they can go to. I think I've seen the different pages be submitted. So now it's just as easy as an app on their phone.
Yep. It was like an industry initiative, this bring your own device. And for the most part, we can do that now. There are some restrictions because of the way that you're trying to collect the data from the patients. You have to make sure that what one patient interprets as a 5 is the same as another patient interprets as a 5. So there's a lot of sort of psychology and cognitive information that goes into putting one of those instruments together. And you have to make sure that you're switching it from paper to a tiny little iPhone like I have to a big iPhone like my husband has to
my Android, a tablet, my Google Pixel,
Right. And to the website, you can have different screen sizes, different resolutions, that you're still collecting data that is similar enough to be grouped together. It was a fascinating sort of place for me to end up. Like, but getting back to the story, these individual acts of heroism are kind of what keep these trials going. And the people who are making them happen are out there running around a hotel room in London at 3 a.m. and then pretending they've slept all night at the training.
I'm not completely exhausted from lack of sleep and needing 20 cups of coffee.
No.
Not me.
I'm fine. No, ask me your questions about this obviously confusing thing I've just thrown at you.
That at that point, they've probably never really seen before. Like now, at least unless they're brand new to clinical trials, they've probably at least seen some version and have some experience. But oh my gosh. Well, that's amazing, Chris. So let me ask you this. So if there's someone out there listening who's like, Chris made this sound like the most amazing job in the whole world. I want to do it. What would you like advise someone? Like, how would they even attempt to get into the data management side?
There's actually like degrees that you can get that are in clinical trial management and clinical trial data. Those are always good. You can take a traditional route, like looking into statistics if that's your thing. And the amount of different places you can go, like I will always advocate for a stats degree because it gave me so many options. And I will give a quick shout out to my dad because growing up, I mean, he didn't have any options, right? He, his dad was a coal miner. His great grandfather was a coal miner. And that's all that they could really do. And he was like, I always want you to have options. So take that brain that God somehow plopped in your head and use it to your advantage, and always give yourself the more options. So my advice is always the same. Like, give yourself some options. Like, don't get pigeonholed into a DM thing. Don't get pigeonholed into a, clinical support thing. And take the opportunities when they come along. I think that's really made all the difference. When I jumped from working at the site to coming back to Pittsburgh and working with UPMC, that wasn't an ideal match. That wasn't a good fit, really. Like, I was completely unqualified for that job. But it was available, and they somehow decided that I could do it if I gave it a go. That's my best advice. Like, get close, and then work your network.
Oh yes.
Show up, do hard work every day, and be a good team player.
Those
and
connections.
Your career progression just sort of shows up from there. Just fundamentals, really. Like, get yourself a degree that's useful. Show up. Reach out to people. I mean, I think it's so much easier now than when I started. Like, I ended up just sitting in somebody's office at the college and asking how I could take that class again. And they were like, why don't you just be that class? Be like, we won't have that class. We'll just have you. I was like, all right, let's do that. It's more about finding the thing that you like to do and kind of being passionate about following it.
Yeah. And
I mean, your standard life advice will take you far. Like, don't be a dick.
Don't be a dick. We need to put it on a shirt. Well, and also, before we wrap up, I want to chat about, because you actually have a podcast now too. So if
I do. Speaking of not being a jerk.
So tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Sure, I would love to. So my sister and I came up with this idea probably 2 years ago, right around the time of the pandemic. So she's had some mental health challenges along the way. We've had some mental health challenges in my family, and our idea was, why don't we start talking about those things and kind of normalize how people deal with them. So she and I kind of deal with our emotional issues through a lot of humor. I don't know if you've picked up on it, Suzanne, but I'm fairly sarcastic.
A little bit.
And it's not every day you're going to come across this statistician who had to decide, like, stats or comedy. I did. I made a choice there. But through kind of humor and talking about how we want to change and improve our lives, and how we're going to kind of use this as an opportunity to learn and grow a little bit as individuals. Through the challenges of some of our mental health issues, we were able to put together the Mental Funny Bone is what it's called. Awesome. So it's really the two of us talking about, what it was like to grow up in our family, and kind of how Sarah's mental challenges sort of impacted us when we were growing up. And then, kind of talking through, my story. So my daughter attempted suicide early on in the pandemic, and how we kind of had to deal with that as a family while there weren't any resources out there at all. So a lot of what we talk about is ways to find help when there's not someone standing there with a road sign that says help is this way. And just in general, how, you don't necessarily have to have a diagnosis in order to start thinking about how to better frame some of the things in your life that are challenging. So we've been picking sort of these self-help books and kind of dissecting them and being like, that's some valuable advice, or that is not that great. I mean, we're not going to do any of that.
I've listened to the first couple episodes, and they are very, you guys are very open, which is very cool. But I just kind of love it because, like, obviously I know you. And so when I listen to like the first ones and all and listening, you're just going with the flow. You're like, we have no idea what we're doing, but we're going with it. And I loved it. And I don't have as much time for podcasts as I used to, you know what I mean? Because we used to be like driving and commuting and stuff. And now we work at home and all. But I love it. So listeners, if you've loved Chris's humor, I definitely do recommend The Mental Funny Bone. So do that. And can you tell our listeners where else they could reach you if they want to connect with you?
Sure. If you want to connect through the Mental Funny Bone podcast, that's gastergirls@gmail.com. We say that at least 9 times an episode because we are desperate for approval. And the two of us collectively can't, it's like oxygen to us. Like if we don't get one piece of fan mail every week, we want to throw in the towel. Or if you just want my personal email, Christine Kanalis @gmail.com. I am always willing to talk about, ways that people can maybe jump into clinical research. I always look for opportunities to kind of be a mentor. I will tell you that I kind of fumbled my way through it and got lucky more often than not, but I'm happy to share ways that I was able to kind of position myself to get lucky, like a trip right in front of the right hole, if you know what I mean, Suzanne.
Oh my gosh, you're so funny. And you are on LinkedIn as well, correct? Yes, for sure.
For sure. You can go and check out my profile. It'll tell you that I've had many a job.
Oh my gosh. Well, Chris, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been awesome as usual talking to you. I love it. And I hope you get opportunity to come again.
Yeah, I'd love to. This has been great. Thank you so much, Suzanne. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about myself for an hour. It's been fantastic.
Awesome. Okay, thanks so much, Chris. Bye-bye.
This brings us to the end of today's episode. I want to extend my sincere thanks to our guest for sharing their inspiring journey. If you'd like to connect with them, you can find their contact information in the show notes. I also want to express my gratitude to you for joining us on this exploration of the clinical research industry. I hope you found today's episode insightful. If so, please consider leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform. It truly helps us reach more listeners. If you have any feedback, questions, or comments about the show, feel free to email me at podcast@iceconsultingllc.com. Thank you once again, and I look forward to having you joining us on our next episode of Heart of the Trial.